Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal Bryan, and joining me today is my dear sister, colleague, and friend, Ms. Sabrina Monarch. Sabrina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I am super stoked to have you here today for a number of reasons. One, because I just love everything about you, clearly. And two, you're wearing my favorite earrings, which is a super big
work
deal.
for you, yeah.
It's a super big deal for me. And also because three, we're going to be diving into a conversation about Pluto, which I'm really excited to talk to you about because I know that you're an evolutionary astrologer. And I just find that my evolutionary astrology colleagues and friends, they speak about the outer planets in a way that's truly moving. So I can't wait to dive into that conversation.
Me too.
Awesome sauce. But before we get there, for those of you who this is your first time joining us here on the Oraculos podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews from astrologers and mystics all around the world who aren't just changing their own lives through their astrological practice, but they're also actively changing this field of astrology that we all know and love. So if you want to continue to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building here on the Oraculos podcast, give yourself a moment. Go down below, like this amazing video if you're watching on YouTube because you know it's going to be great, but also subscribe to the Oraculos podcast and share it with your other astrologically minded friends so that you can stay in the loop of what these amazing astrologers are up to. So, Sabrina, once again, super stoked to have you here. Thank you so much for joining in the space with me. And tell us a little bit about who you are and what has brought you to astrology and what specifically has caused you to root yourself in this specific perspective of astrology that is evolutionary astrology.
Sure. So I'm Sabrina Monarch. I have been into astrology since I was a kid. I found out about it on my 8th birthday when I was gifted a calendar from my mom that was my first introduction to the sun signs. And I continued to just kind of be, into astrology through kind of like middle school, high school. And it was when I got to college that I started to have more mystical experiences, more synchronicities, more things that I noticed that the traditional kind of worldview around me or the conventional worldview would just kind of brush off as coincidence or not necessarily meaningful. So I became more and more curious to speak this language that I felt really resonated with my actual experience. And I had a really significant spiritual awakening or spiritual emergence when I was 21 that, I think many spiritual awakenings go through this intense ecstasy or kind of peak experience, and then a dark night of the soul, and then an integration period. For me, it was definitely a peak experience. Then it was a dark night of the soul because my experience was medicalized. My family was concerned for me, and I ended up having to see a psychiatrist. And, in that space, being genuinely not sure if I was ever going to have a good life, really freaking out and like really at like a rock bottom kind of place. And that's when I reached out to an evolutionary astrologer who I'd met in Olympia, the college town that I was in. And this astrologer, had amazing like word of mouth, like so many people who weren't into astrology in that town, or not even like they're into it, but not like able to read for themselves, would have these glowing, stories of what they had gained from, readings from him. And I reached out to him at this crisis point. And I had been trying to find answers. I had been trying to make sense of why was this happening? Why did my spiritual awakening, not translate to the people around me? And it was some of the first, really kind of helpful and orienting advice that I'd gotten, besides people that were maybe compassionate and seeming like, oh, it seems like you're going through a lot. But I mean, someone that could understand what was happening and offer me some context. So I began to study evolutionary astrology in that really low point, went back to college, kind of began my life again and studied astrology for the first time, and then began to realize that I could form my own delineations and My clairvoyance and psychic vision was opening up. I see these little lights that look like stars that appear like on the page or on people's faces or in my inner vision. And working with those lights, and continuing to have experiences that emphasize or kind of point me back to some of these archetypal truths is really, I feel like, what makes my astrology practice and kind of channel for astrology today. I have a podcast as well. We're going to have you on it. And I teach astrology at this point.
Awesome sauce. Sabrina, I think it's really cool. I mean, first of all, shout out to mothers who get their kids hooked on astrology, even if tangentially, because my mom had these teacups around the house for everyone based on their sun sign. So I had a Taurus teacup and she had an Aries teacup and my dad had a Cancer teacup. So I really think it's cool how those same parents who in the end probably don't really understand what we're doing when we really go gung-ho into it are the same parents who were the initial spark to begin with. So definitely
Yeah.
kudos to parents everywhere who have served that role even unintentionally. But also something that you mentioned just about your story, I think it's really cool also how you were able to find a context for the deep, intense transformations that you were going through your astrology. And I think it just goes to show that so many times we undergo changes within our lives that the only recourse of our family and friends around us is to try to put a medical name on it. But there's this wellspring within those experiences that can be unlocked using more ancient ways of knowing. And astrology is one of those ways, tarot is one of those ways, dream work and shamanism are these ways that our ancestors have dealt with the not just the experience of the spiritual awakening, but the kind of path work that you have to do after having that initial experience. So I think it's super amazing that you found astrology at that point, because I think that for me at least, it would make my relationship to astrology that much deeper if it was really the thing that saved me when nothing else around me really held the medicine for me.
Right. Yeah, it seemed like it was kind of conspired to work out that way.
Most definitely. Now, Sabrina, you had mentioned earlier before we went on that you wanted us to specifically speak about Pluto. And I think that it's a good point in time for us to bring that into the conversation as well, because we're already speaking about the dark night of the soul and what happens after awakening. And we know that Pluto holds so much of these things within his or its archetype. So tell us a bit about why Pluto is such a big thing for you, why this is something that you want to share with us.
Well, when I first started doing astrology research when I was younger, like for example, on cafe astrology, which I learned so much from, like I really did. When you get to the, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, the delineations turn into like a sentence or two long, and it says that this is a generational pattern. It's not necessarily that personal. And for a while, for years, I just accepted that as a thing and didn't really think that much of it. And it's interesting too how, the personal planets, so like Mercury, Venus, Mars, are going to be so much more visible in our experience. But then when you have maybe some otherworldly shamanic experience, you're kind of getting into the transpersonal territory, which is what the outer planets represent. But evolutionary astrology specifically utilizes Pluto as the starting point for chart analysis. Like it's the root from which the rest of the tree grows. So it's always a context. And it makes it like that orientation, I think, can allow us to see how absolutely personal it is to have Pluto in a sign or have Pluto in a house. And Pluto will represent our deeper underlying desire nature. And some of the psychological complexes that we form around these desires. So desire itself, another thing, learning before kind of a deeper foray into astrology, picking up that kind of commonly said thing that desire is the root of suffering, which I don't actually believe to be true. Desire can definitely be painful, but it's our relationship with desire that there's that pain. It's, do we think that something is scarce or that we have to get it or extract it? And those are all kind of Plutonic themes. Desire is really like a navigational compass for the soul. There's an idea within evolutionary astrology, and it's not the only spiritual system that really has this idea, but it's the idea that we chose our incarnations, that we didn't just, I grew up with the message around me from like the scientific kind of conventional worldview that we're on this rock that happened to have these perfect conditions aligned for life to happen, and that it's just kind of a random kind of accident, and that everything is material, that consciousness lives in the brain, that because we don't know what happens to, is there a soul beyond the body? Like, not necessarily, because we don't have proof, and proof is what we go off of. But when it comes to these other teachings about soul, it's this concept that we choose these incarnations on purpose, and that it's the exact kind of training ground or circumstances that we need for our particular, soul evolution. And this idea can be like, it's not always popular. People don't always like it because there's the question of, why would we choose difficult circumstances or abusive things? And so I think even working with that logic can be a transformative process that results in at least imagining, if not fully believing it at first, complete radical accountability for one's incarnation. And then from that perspective, there's an empowerment within that of, if I chose this, why? Like, what am I, like, what's my lesson here? Or what can I do with this material? There's also a way that Pluto really represents our soul's riches. And some of these things may be immediately apparent in our environment, such as if we had a talent for music early in life and our parents put us in music classes and it was just kind of a natural, easeful circumstance. Some of our soul's riches come through challenge. So it's like we experience something that's pretty much the opposite, or some kind of complementary alchemical substance that will help us like really tap into our soul's gifts and our power. So I think that working with Pluto and actually really imagining it more deeply in the natal chart as like, this is personal. It's not just your generation. If you're Pluto and Scorpio, you probably have past life experiences of occultism, or, being at least deeply investigative and getting to the bottom of things. But this is a generation that has a lot of karmas around power and powerlessness and empowerment. And just because it's generational doesn't mean that we don't each live it out in our own, personal way too. So I think that making it more personal can have huge transformative ramifications in one's life.
I'm really pleased to hear you speaking about Pluto in such a rich and satisfying sort of way, because it does personalize it, and it does move beyond the one or two sentences that we see online or that we see in the books. This is for your entire generation, so we don't have much to say about it, sort of thing. And it's a very new perspective for me. But I think all of the planets have this potential to be interiorized, or have this potential to be made personal or particular to our own lives. And I really think it's cool to take something like Pluto, that we know it has such a slow orbit, and say, hey, even this too can be brought into your personal experience. And you do it within your own client work, and you do it to the great benefit of the clients you work with. And I think it's really a brand new sort of way of looking at astrology, because it definitely goes beyond sun, moon, and rising. But from what you're saying, it seems as if it has the potency to really touch someone in a very deep and soulful way.
Definitely. Yeah, it's the unconscious, it's the shadow. So it it can hit at a deeper, almost more subliminal level than like the personal planets.
So, in the modern conception of sun, moon, and rising, basically, because I know that that's what a lot of people default to when they think about astrology, where would you say Pluto fits within our working out of ourselves or our personal self delineation?
When I'm looking at a chart, there's many chart readings where I just don't even get to the sun or the ascendant because I start with Pluto and the lunar nodes. And Pluto it just is kind of like the base tone or like the root chakra. And definitely, I've been witness to astrology readings where someone starts with the sun and they do it in a way that's so brilliant and so insightful. But I think that working with Pluto, um, I think it can be particularly helpful for anyone that is really wanting to move past their limitations, or someone who's kind of grappling with like turmoil or tension within themselves, and wants to um, discover some kind of key within, because Pluto has this as within, as without kind of magic to it. So one thing that Pluto, and it's not only Pluto that does this, like I can think of like Cancer Capricorn doing this a little bit too, but the sense of like wanting to manage the external environment or control or find forms of like hooking or manipulating. Like, let's say, it's really getting to the bottom line question of what's your security nature and where is that? For some people, it's going to be all about their relationship with their home. For someone else, it could be their public image and their career. For someone else, it could be their close, like intimate romantic partnerships. And so if that's the place where you have many lifetimes of condensed experience around, and let's say it's about romance, and like some kind of seventh house or Libra theme, and you come here with a certain amount of charisma and charm because that is what you've gained from all of this, earth school and relationship. But if that charm and charisma is being used as like a more weaponized kind of way of like getting people to do what you want instead of addressing your underlying security needs, then it creates drama and these entanglements and these blowups and these scenes. And at some point, I think that the soul gets really tired and is like, why is this happening? And like, what can I do to shift it?
And there's this other thing that I have found in my personal practice of astrology that we meet clients who come to us specifically because they're going through things that we specifically are the ones to assist them in healing or figuring out or troubleshooting. And do you find that the people who you work with, they come to you because they need to hear this particular perspective of astrology in their lives? Do people come to you when they're in that valley and needing a light? Or what is the common theme that you found amongst your clients?
So it's interesting. Like for a little bit, I was actually like, I wanted to work with people who were like going through just like the most crisis in that, because I felt like, okay, like Pluto is, here, we can talk about that. But the more that I began to get like comfortable with creating delineations, I began to feel like I could just kind of talk with anyone at any phase of their life. I think the commonality, though, is that people that come to me, there's like an introspective quality of like wanting to understand how to participate. And it's not as much about like, when should I take this particular action? Because I don't practice timing techniques like that. Um, but I have, sometimes, like I remember getting a letter from someone where they just kind of detailed these like cataclysmic experiences one after the next. And when I see something like that, I feel Pluto and I'm like, this person actually has a lot of power. When your life, has this kind of dramatic, explosive quality to it. And it's like, how how can this be internalized a little bit more? Because there's been some kind of pattern of giving power away, which can create these very dramatic scenes. And I think that people, there's so many platitudes about how it's all inside or like, the power's within, and it's true, but actually finding our way into that is a little bit mysterious. And I think that these kinds of teachings can help with that.
This concept of developing a participatory practice, or a practice where people feel as if they can co-create an astrological experience with us, I think it's really truly magical, and it begins to take astrology out of just the field of telling people's fortunes, but it actually makes astrology helpful. And I think that that's really important, this concept of creating an astrology that is robust, but also one that's fundamentally helpful, because that's the main thing that we're here to do, to offer helpful service to people who are in need. And I also think it's funny, the thing that you said earlier regarding you being a crisis person, or you wanting to find people in the heart of their trauma or the heart of their crisis. And you said that that's how you felt in the beginning. And I do think that there's something within all of us in the beginning of our astrology journey where we want to go for the highlights, or we want to find the drama, because it's a lot easier to talk about drama than it is to talk about nuance. And so I think it's really telling in terms of your own journey with astrology, how you've seen yourself move through this arc of growth from wanting to find the people who are really in the thick of it, to now being in a space where you could work with anyone, and also being in a space where you can create a really settled and mature environment of participation between you and your clients. Because one, it's maturity on your part, but two, it's also something that grows and solidifies within all of us the more we practice astrology earnestly.
That's really insightful.
Well, yeah, when I was younger, I definitely was a stickler for drama, and I definitely wanted all of the people who were going through their second divorce, and there's something about that. There's something about being able to talk to someone when they're in that place that has power attached to it, and not just you having power as the astrologer, but also that moment is such a potent moment. The moment of trauma, the moment of death, the moment of going through the valley of the shadow of death is such a potent moment for a lot of people, that it really seems as if we're stepping into the role of the shaman and the jungle physician when we're able to help someone navigate that place. But there are also those tinier moments where someone isn't going through their 10th divorce, they just really need someone to talk to. And I think that it's a great treasure to be able to give someone a rich experience, whether or not they're in a valley of despair, that we could still talk to someone's soul and just give them a reminder about why they're here and what their purpose is here, and how they can help to create a better life for themselves.
Exactly. I think even like this kind of connects with desire, because when people are going through crisis, they definitely can have, if they're seeking guidance, that desire is just like it's right there at the forefront. And reading for people, it's kind of like there is some kind of desire that brings them in, even if it's just curiosity. And curiosity is now something that I could work with. But as a newer astrologer, curiosity, I was like, I don't know how to work with this. Like I need the material, But yeah, that's changed.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned not knowing how to work with just the curiosity as a newer astrologer, because I've been there as well. I've been in that place where, like, you need to tell me specifically what you're here for, and we need to hash it out for 75 minutes. But once again, we grow into a space where we're able to hold and facilitate magical space for people, regardless of whether or not they need a deep revelation, where we're still able to hold a good, grounded space for others. And it's a part of our own maturity, within this field. So I love hearing that in you, and I love feeling how that also mirrors a lot of what my own experience has been, because I think this is where astrology really does the most amount of good. The point where we can hold someone's curiosity and we can move them from just a light curiosity deep into the heart of our own magical approach to astrology.
Definitely.
So now, speaking about taking people deep into the heart of our own magical approach to astrology, I know that you have a course that's coming up in the new year. So talk to our viewers and listeners about what you're going to be teaching and what they can take away from studying in this intensive way with you.
Yeah. Something that I've been reflecting on, I've been teaching this course since 2017, and I organized it so that we go through these building blocks. We talk about the zodiac signs and the planets, and we talk about aspects and aspect phases. And we learn how to like put things together until sequentially we're working with like the whole evolutionary astrology chart analysis method, where we start with Pluto for some insight around the soul's desire nature. We go to the lunar nodes for some insight about how, like what has been the vehicle for that desire, the planetary rulers for the lunar nodes. So there's this whole kind of technical structure. But I think that what I've started to reflect on recently as like behind that is that from the very start of teaching, my intention with this group is to facilitate an experience where people form a personal connection with astrology that is something that they get to keep with them for the rest of their lives. So to have that kind of spark where you feel a connection to the archetypes. One of the ways that I think like what really shifted for me the first time I studied with a teacher was my teacher's emphasis. So just for my lineage, I studied with Ari Moshe, the evolutionary astrologer. And I learned from him this idea that you can feel the archetypes within you, that you don't just need to look in a book for like the significations of everything. And I really hadn't thought of it before. I would read books by, astrologers and feel like, wow, like I wonder if I'll ever be like this someday. But just getting that nudge of like, you can do it, you can feel these things, started to really open up a permissioning for my intuition, and starting to notice that, sometimes it goes so far now as to, I'll have certain moments where reality kind of gets like water and like Neptunian and bendy, and I'll just like be flushed with this sensation of like, this person's a Gemini. I just know it. And I like ask them later, like, what's your sign? And like, sure enough, they're a Gemini. Like you can just start to see the archetypes and how they infuse circumstances and how they infuse people and people's demeanors. So I really, that there's an importance to me for that, of like helping people see their own capacity to be intuitive with astrology and to feel these archetypes. Another part of it is that I think I have a really optimistic or kind of Jupiterian energy around astrology. Like I'm always looking for how the archetypes can be portals to expansion and growth and evolution, even if it's like, with Capricorn, for example, there's like that imagery of like the sea goat climbing, but there's also phases where it's a sea goat and there's a dive into the ocean and like a de-armoring process. And so how do we think about depression? Is it something, we're not being productive, it's wrong, it's bad, all this judgment, all this Capricorn energy? Or is it a moment to like let go of all this heavy egoic energy of extra stuff that we've built around ourselves? So just like really looking into the magic of different parts of human experiences and phases and cycles, so that we can have deeper empathy and compassion for all different kinds of archetypal experiences, but also find like the levity or the joy or like the inspiration in all of them. So yeah, at the end of class too, we learn how to read, we read our natal charts like as a group, and that's always a pretty magical experience.
Well, I think it is super magical, the entire thing, and your own personal vision to hold space for an optimistic astrology. Because, especially today, I think that more people need multiple perspectives from which to view their astrology. And there's been a lot of emphasis on astrology as a standalone thing, as in you, this is where it is, and that's it. And I've participated in that a lot throughout my life, and possibly I still do. But I find that as I grow older, I am moving more into a space of this is what things are. And if you choose to do nothing about it, this is how they'll stay. But if you actively choose to exercise a deep wealth of personal willpower to turn back the tide of this heavy momentum of time and really put your foot down and say, hey, I'm going to make some changes surrounding these areas of my life, then that here's what that looks like and here's how that is available to you. So I think that there's a way in which every chart and everything that we see has the ability to reflect back to us in this dichotomy. Are you screwed because you have Jupiter in Gemini and Jupiter is supposed to be in its detriment in Gemini, and you have a scattered brain and you can't really focus and you're all over the place? Or do you learn how to turn that to your advantage where you have the brain of a multitasker and you can bring together the disparate pieces of a larger story and make it all work because you know how to approach the story from multiple angles? Like everything within astrology has this spectrum of possibility of how these things can be used productively as well as non-productively. And I think it's really important that you, as a teacher of astrologers of tomorrow, are holding this space for people to see that multiplicity without necessarily seeing something and thinking, oh my God, I'm damned, I'm doomed forever, because that's what my chart says. So kudos to you for holding a space for the magic of the spheres, essentially.
Thanks. Yeah, I do think that even just that imaginative thinking around like problem solving, essentially, like if there is, you're feeling like a tension or a conflict in the chart, cool, like what next? Like what's the next part of the story, not just ending it at the conflict and like it sucks, goodbye, but
Yeah.
finishing it.
I said recently that some of my favorite astrologers in the world have been modern astrologers, people who say Saturn, well, not Saturn, but people who say that Pluto rules Scorpio and Neptune is ruling Pisces and Uranus is ruling Aquarius. And those are people who I've learned a great deal from, even though I myself a neo-traditional astrologer of sorts. I've gained so much from those people in my life, partly because there's a solution orientation I find that is embodied within psychological astrology, for example, which is really this thing of taking your charts and looking at it as a means of interacting with your own psychological presence within the world. And I think that evolutionary astrology takes psychological astrology and spiritualizes it and possibly makes it a little bit more soulful. And I think that that's really necessary, that we're not just turning astrology into another tool of conventional psychological whatever, but we're actually remembering that at the heart of this astrology is actually a heart and a soul, and that we practice an astrology that has the ability to make space for the power within that heart and that soul without making prophetic damnation over someone's life, because that can oftentimes do far more harm than good.
Kind of reminds me of Rick Tarnas, who I know was on your show. He has something called the Parable of the Two Suitors in Cosmos and Psyche. Are you familiar with it?
I'm familiar with this book. I love Rick's book, but go on, tell us about it.
So in the parable of the two suitors, it's a thought experiment of, let's say that there are two suitors getting to know the universe. And there's one suitor who has this kind of traditional scientific perspective, who only really seeks to understand the nature of the cosmos and, the Earth, for example, in order to extract its resources and to exhibit domination over it with, their own intellectual mastery, versus the other suitor who perceives and the first suitor perceives the universe as like inert, lifeless, like only a projection of our own meaning, right? And then the second suitor views the universe as just as intelligent, if not more intelligent than themselves. And there's a seeking to know, a curiosity that is aimed toward greater creative collaboration and union. And I think that he asks in this parable, who do you think the universe will reveal its greatest secrets and truths to? Which I love, because I do think that in working with a participatory astrology, or kind of getting into the magic of life, like by letting go of certain filters that I think we've been conditioned to have because of this kind of materialistic worldview, and the idea that animals have like this limited kind of consciousness, and we don't know if they have feelings, and trees don't have thoughts, and all this kind of stuff. Like, what if we were to view things with the more mysterious, kind of curious gaze of a lover who believes that there is something there, that there will be a kind of, there often is like a reveal of something that cannot be felt otherwise. And I think even with astrology, like there are many people that won't entertain it or get into it because they're just like, there's no proof, there's no evidence, when there definitely is, but maybe not in the way that they would like it to come across. But it is kind of like a key to even being seduced by the spheres, is to, see value and like see interiority or meaning in them.
It goes back to this notion of living in the world with a sense of mythopoetic awareness. And there's a quote, I think it comes from Joseph Campbell, who says that a culture that has no internal working mythological system is a culture that is already dead, and that suffers from a deep sense of soul loss already. Because if your only contact point with the world around you is the concrete building that you work in, or the steel bars, the scaffolding that holds that building up, then you miss out on a depth of wisdom, and you miss out on a depth of experience that truly can only be found if you experience the world around you with a sense of reverential awe and with a sense of mystery and curiosity. And so it's this revival of the ancient spirit, which isn't a revival of some dogma, but it's this revival of living magically within the universe, knowing that this universe is magical, and allowing ourselves to be participants in that magic in a way where we communicate with the trees communicate with us, we communicate with the stars communicate with us. And when we strike this sort of relationship with our astrology, and when our astrology becomes the vehicle through which we enable other people to do the same, then we become the natural magicians of antiquity. We become the shamans, the jungle physicians. We become these people who are entrusted with carrying the sacred medicine of tomorrow into the future, because this is the thing that keeps humanity alive. Humanity's ability to, at some level, no matter how dense your materialistic worldview may be, but the seed of awareness within all of us that beneath this matter isn't just more matter, but there actually is a ghost in this machine. and that ghost orchestrates the cascading beauty of nature, I mean, like, that'll bring anyone to tears. And it's that ability within us to be moved to a state of deep reverence and awe of all of this that I think we as astrologers stand as holding and carrying and maintaining for the rest of the world until the rest of the world decides to wake up.
I like that. Yeah, it's interesting. That's kind of why I like to teach astrology, is because I really like the idea of people who are called to learn how to speak the language too, because then you just have that kind of direct access. And then some people aren't called to that and they do just like getting readings and, but I think that a lot of people get this bug, I guess, where it's like you start to learn about astrology and suddenly you're like voracious and you want to know everything. And I do think that it then becomes, there is a sacredness to holding that information, because when you're translating it to like a layperson, I guess there is that power differential. And so there's like, yeah, it's interesting to kind of think about too, like even like as a business person and an astrologer, like knowing that when you're truly devoted to your craft or your practice, like when it's coming from that place, and you have a degree of business savviness, but that's not like dominating the astrology, then clients, students like come because they're attracted to the portal that you're opening up. And there's just something kind of magical about that, or I even had this experience of when I was in grad school, I went to CIIS and I learned about the perinatal matrices. So Stanislav Grof concept of our original kind of birth trauma and how it's related to different planetary bodies, like different phases of the birth process. And I had been like steeped in that material and it was working me. I was having dreams. I felt like I was being electrocuted at night because I was just like rapidly synthesizing information and like recontextualizing a bunch of memories through the perinatal matrices. So I was like really kind of like in it. And I got an email from someone about a particularly traumatic experience giving birth. And like they just like really needed guidance. It was like, I just studied this. I just learned this. I can help. And it's like, what allowed that synchronicity to occur? I did not say anything online about my recent studies. It was like purely energetic.
And that, I think, is a big part of this overarching magic of astrology, that we are guided and that we are placed in situations that are divinely or cosmically orchestrated. And I I wish this for the entire astrological community, especially the younger generation coming into astrology now, where there is a lot of textbook astrology. And I guess in every generation there's that. But there's this heavy emphasis of astrology in a very specific sort of direction that I have participated in to a large degree. This concept of an academically rigorous astrology, I've been a part of that for many years of my life, and now I feel myself wanting to exist within softer spaces, and I still can't fully eradicate from myself the root of the pursuit of antiquity within myself, because that's built into what I do and it's built into what I teach. But at the same time, I had a client today who didn't need that. What she needed was very specific dialogue about her receiving actual counseling help to help her unleash her voice that had been stifled within her for all of her life, and to know that if she released her voice, then she could potentially align herself with a career that felt more appropriate to the releasing of that voice, because a large part of her own captivated power was that she didn't feel as if she could speak. She didn't feel as if she could speak to other people. And as a result, she ended up being in the service-based profession where her speaking wasn't the highlight. It was all the other things that she could do. But the astrology led us in the direction of asking, and what would happen if you were to unlock this voice component that seems to be lost within yourself? What else? And that questioning came out of my own non-astrological studies as a hypnotherapist and as a counselor in that regard. But it also came out of my humanity. And I think that the astrology that we practice should give room not just for you to say the things that are astrologically appropriate, because you know that this is your current time lord period, and this is your current zodiacal releasing phase, and your solar return for this year is saying whatever, but that you allow yourself to use that astrological moment as a template to give someone something that's genuinely meaningful to them in a heartfelt sort of way. And as I grow older, that's the sort of astrology that I want to participate in. Yes, an astrology that's still strong, but an astrology that's healing and helpful. And it sounds like you're already doing that within your work, and you're sharing that with your students.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair too, the logical and like being extremely rigorous, like I'm Mercury in Pisces retrograde. And there's just certain pieces of information that stick with me, you know, so feelings and cinematic motifs and like patterns, you know, of like an emotional nature just really resonate with me. So I love like talking about the human condition. But I was getting an image when you were sharing that, like I saw this scene in my mind, speaking of Mercury and Pisces and just like imagistic thinking.
This person has Mercury and Pisces, the person who I was speaking to this morning.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, so I was seeing this like, I mean, I love that placement, honestly. Someone's like crying or something, they're upset, and their partner's like a neuroscientist, and they're like, honey, like you're just having this kind of chemical whatever, and just explaining it away with the system versus actually being with the experience, I think is a risk of any kind of technical language. And if astrology, you know, it's a really magical language in that there can be this heart mind synthesis that comes through where it's like you can have this the technical side of it or the rigorous like technique side of it open up nuances that lead to emotional release or like conversations that are triggered by, you know, these delineations. But to be able to, you know, I love to like as an astrologer, like one of my I feel like early training experiences was just interviewing people about their lives with their natal chart pulled up, and I could see it, but we weren't talking about their chart and I wasn't giving them any delineations. I was just asking them about themselves and like being in that role of like, okay, astrology's in the room, but we're just having like a conversation and I'm not telling you anything. Versus, you know, at that time, it used to be a fear of like, if someone comes into a reading and they're just curious and they have nothing to say, and I have to share things about their chart the whole time, because I actually would rather have a dialogue. But at this point, if someone does want me to just talk the whole time, I can, you know, but I always like ask questions and leave room for dialogue because I'm interested in that, you know, and I think that maybe there could be a critique of that, that it's no longer, what's the empirical? Like if you're getting information from the person while you're doing the reading, how do you know if what you're saying is still magicianry and wowing them? But it's like, no, if the language, if the tool is there to help you have a conversation that creates insight and moves energy, then I don't need to feel like it's empirical data.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Sabrina, I know that you also still work with clients. So talk to us about how we can connect with you if we wanted to receive a consultation, and just what sort of services do you offer over at Monarch Astrology?
Sure. So My books were just open, but I just closed them because we booked. But the best way to get a consultation with me is to get on my mailing list, which is linked at my website. If you go on, it's a pop-up window, but if you go on any of the forecasts, there will be a link to sign up. I can share the link too for the notes. And I do, however, offer 6 months to 1 year mentorship and coaching, where we look at the natal chart over an extended period of time. And that really is also working with people in their processes. So what's coming up for you in life? What is it that you're desiring? What are you working through? And like bringing it back to the chart and just having these like stimulating dialogues over that period of time to discuss what's coming up for you. So I've been really enjoying that and been, focused on that. My course is coming up in January, the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive, and people can find me on social media as well at Sabrina Monarch on Instagram and at Sabrina_Monarch on Twitter.
Awesome sauce, Sabrina. So I'm going to put all of your contact information down below so that our listeners and viewers out there can dive into this work that you do and benefit from your own depth and wisdom and knowledge and just your soulful approach to this astrology that we love. So I'm going to put that down below so that all of you can go check out Sabrina's work and jump into the magic with her.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, Sabrina, and thank you so much for coming today and sharing in this space with all of us. It means a lot to me, and sitting here and speaking with you has truly been a balm and a point of therapy for me today. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to you being here again.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Mychal.
You're very welcome. And to our listeners and viewers out there, if this is your 100th time joining us here on the Oraculos podcast, or if this is time number 1, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for continuing to come and join in this virtual astrological space with us. I receive your wonderful love, your warmth, your wisdom, and most importantly, I receive your support. So if you want to continue to be a part of the magic and the momentum that we're building over here on the Oraculos podcast, please do, yes, go down below, like this video, and subscribe to the Oraculos podcast, and share this interview today with your other astrologically and magically minded colleagues and friends, because more and more people in the world need to know about these amazing conversations that we're having with these amazing astrologers, mystics, and healers from around the world. So until next time, I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, leaving you in peace and love and hope. Until we meet again, have a good one. Bye-bye. Sabrina Monarch.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.